What's up, everybody? This is LA Knight, and I am back with a review for The Serpent'S Shadow by Mercedes Lackey, not to be mistaken for The Serpent's Shadow by Rick Riordan, which I have not read. Although, interestingly enough, they both deal with non-Western mythologies, so, that's kind of interesting. But The Serpent's Shadow is the first book in Mercedes Lackey's series that she started back in, the 90s, The Elemental Mages, which is a series of Victorian-era fantasies which each book is an adaptation of a fairy tale, but also bringing in much stronger female characters than are considered typical, quote-unquote, for fairy tales, and bringing in this idea of element-oriented magic. The first one, The Serpent's Shadow, technically actually The Fire Rose by Mercedes Lackey is the first one, but it's A, the only one to take place in America, B, not as good as the other ones, and C, does in no way impact the rest of the series. Unlike the other ones, where all the other books in the series all have characters who interact with each other, and they all take place in England. Except I think one of them takes place in Germany. Or maybe two of them do. I forget. But I haven't read those ones yet. I'm only up to book 7, I think. But this is the first book. I actually read it once when I was in high school because when I was a sophomore, I got grounded from everything. Because I had a C, I think, or a D in biology, and I failed first semester English. And that's a whole story in and of itself that involved a bitch teacher who tried to fuck me over. But, that's a story for another day. And so I then had to rely on my school library because my parents packed up all my books in boxes and stuck them in the garage, along with books that belonged to other people, including the library, and my friends. But, so I then had to rely solely on my school library because my parents didn't have the forethought to call the library and tell them that I wasn't allowed to check books out. Also, probably the librarian wouldn't have listened to them, but just on the off chance that they would have, my parents didn't think of it. And one of the first books that I read was The Serpent's Shadow after this point. And the reason I know this is because I kept a log. I specifically went out of my way to read even more than I usually did just to spite my parents. Because, and all that stuff. And The Serpent's Shadow, I remember thinking when I first read it, how cool it was because you had a biracial heroine, and for those of you who don't know because you're new to my channel, I am mixed race. I am 45% approximately African American, 40% white, and 15% Native American. And so, I still don't, but I especially back then did not see a lot of biracial heroines, so I was really excited, although this character is half white and half Indian, but, who cares? I'll take what I can get. And also she was a doctor, which I thought was cool. When I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman because I liked the idea of women doctors. For a long time, I wanted to be a doctor until, when I was about 13, I suddenly developed an aversion to blood. And I don't know why. I mean, gory blood. I don't know why, but I suddenly, certain things I just couldn't handle anymore. And that, put the kibosh on that. And so we have this girl, this woman, I should say woman, named Maya Witherspoon. She has an English dad, had an English dad, and an Indian mom, and she is on the run from somebody from India, and she has to figure out how to set up a medical practice here, because apparently women doctors could not just practice where they wanted like male doctors could. They had to get permission made up entirely with, hold on a second, my computer is acting up. Oh, there we go. The only reason she got away with setting up the way she wanted to was because, for the most part, she was taking charity patients and working in poor hospitals. And so she wasn't going to steal any glory or whatever from the male doctors. And so that's like the basic premise of her medicine practice, and getting established in England. Is unlike most doctors at this time period, she's willing to offer her medical services to people who live on the street, like the homeless, prostitutes, dancers, opera singers. Apparently, during the Victorian era, artistic women were considered licentious by nature. I don't know why, but so painters, models, professional beauties are what models are called. Models, painters, dancers, singers are all one step up from hookers, apparently, at this time. And I really enjoyed the book, but the fairy tale it's based on is Snow White, and I thought that was interesting because there are no dwarves. Instead, Maya has 7 pets who belong to her mom, and they're actually avatars of different Hindu gods. And the reason why they're helping out is because the person who is after her used to be a priestess of Kali, still thinks she's a priestess of Kali, and claims that she's acting on the whim of, or on the wish. It's not really a whim. Whim implies like it's fickle, but doing what Kali has told her to do. Turns out actually that Kali has turned her face away from this woman because this woman is doing all these terrible things. And I like the fact that they actually show that although this person is purporting to be working for Kali Durga, the goddess of destruction, she actually isn't, because too often, death gods and destruction gods are shown as being evil in fiction, and they're really not. I mean, I can't count the number of books where Hades is the bad guy, or movies, cough Hercules, looking at you. Um, and so I like the fact that they changed that. The book is interesting because I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's no real twists or anything like that. It's very much obvious that it's an adult fiction novel, and I say that not because there's like boatloads of sex in it or anything, but just because of the way it's written. It's not very plot twisty. It seems like from the adult fiction that I read isn't very like gasp, surprise. That seems to be more in the purview of juvenile fiction, which actually I prefer those things, which is probably one of the reasons why I read so much juvenile fiction, but it's not. So the plot was very straightforward, but I enjoyed it. I remember enjoying it a lot more than I did this time when I read it the first time, but I still enjoyed it this time when I reread it. I would recommend it to people. At this point, I don't think buying it used or secondhand to prevent Mercedes Lackey from getting your money for this work is going to affect her in any real way, because that woman has made like bazillions of dollars over the last almost 50 years. She published her first book in 1974. She's one of the grandmothers of modern fantasy. Um, so, and also she's a really nice lady. But the thing is that the book has some things in it that are kind of problematic. This review is going to be pretty short because since there's not a lot of plot twisting, there's not a lot for me to gush about because the plot is pretty straightforward and there's not a lot of action. I do like I'm actually going to talk about things that I liked, and then I'll talk about things that I didn't like. One of the things that I liked is that this book addresses classism, whatever. The love interest is a tradesman, and he is like, you know what? I don't know why women can't be elemental masters in. There's this thing called the White Lodge, which is full of elemental masters, and all the masters are men, and except for the love interest, whose name is Peter, except for Peter, they're all lords. There's not a single one who's a tradesman or a merchant except Peter, and the only reason that they accepted Peter is because they need him because he's so badass. Same thing ends up happening to Maya, which is a huge deal because women are not allowed in the White Lodge, and foreigners certainly aren't, and that's what they call her. They call her a foreigner. Um, and so I like the fact that they address that. Like, a lot of the fiction that I read, the fantasy fiction that I read that's set in England, tends to be a little worshipful of British culture, like Harry Potter, and I don't like that because British culture is not inherently great, and there's actually a lot of things in it that are wrong. And I'm not saying that American culture is better, but Americans are in no way hesitant to point out the fact that America sucks. But a lot of the British fiction that makes its way over to America in any kind of like large number tends to show Britain as being like this great place, except for maybe 1984. And so I like the fact that Mercedes Lackey points out a lot of the issues that were in British history, like the fact that Britain was, really sexist and really racist at the time. It deals a lot with the suffragette movement that was happening during this time period. There are things that I didn't know about the suffragette movement when I was first reading the book that I learned from this book, and then later, looked it up, and it turned out a lot of it was true. Like, women would go on hunger strikes as a form of protest against the fact that they couldn't vote, and they would be force-fed, and the guys who were doing it didn't know what they were doing, and the women would die. I didn't know that. I didn't realize how bad the suffragist movement suffered when it started. I didn't know all of the things that women had to deal with in order to get the right to vote. I don't know if it was as bad in America. I think possibly because Britain might have done it first, and so like we knew what to expect. Maybe I honestly don't know. I think it's sad that actually I don't know very much about um, the suffragist movement in America. Because it's not really taught in school. I don't know why. I mean, they explain like, yeah, women got the right to vote, blah blah blah, and this date, and then this amendment gave us the right and whatever. But they don't. I mean, that's it. That's literally all that it is. And then we go on to read about other things in class. And so I really like the fact that in this book it really highlights a lot of things historically that I feel like people should have learned in school that we didn't learn, and I don't know why we didn't. I mean, maybe because there's not enough time. I'm sure that administrators for school districts will say that that's the reason. Um, but whatever. You do you, I guess, and make up your excuses as you want. But and so I really liked that, although it was sometimes very difficult to read because these women were in such dire circumstances a lot of the times. I didn't know for a long time. I knew that women could be forced to have hysterectomies. For those who don't know, that is when that is a surgery where they remove the ovaries, uterus, and fallopian tubes, and so women can't have babies anymore. And a lot of times, that could be important. Like if you had ovarian cancer or uterine cancer, that was really the best way not to die, was to get a hysterectomy. But I did know before starting the book that sometimes the reason it's called a hysterectomy is because supposedly at the time, well-renowned psychologists and psychiatrists were saying that a woman's reproductive organs often caused hysteria. Also, I mean, there's like a lot of things that about women's sexual health that I learned either from this book and then looked it up later to verify it, or learned around the same time that I was reading this book. Some of it, a lot of it, very disturbing, and that was one of them, was that hysterectomies were used as a quote unquote cure for nervousness in women, and that's like a very invasive and dangerous surgery, and so like that's crazy pants to me. And the reason I bring this up is because the other thing I didn't know is that even on women who were considered mentally sound, hysterectomies were considered a thing that was not a big deal to do, even without the patient's consent. There's a young woman, a young Catholic girl, who is just got married, maybe like 4 or 5 months before she pops up in the book, and she's pregnant and she has appendicitis. And it is hard but not impossible to take out somebody's appendix without taking out their uterus at this time. Nowadays nobody even thinks to do that. Like I don't like no doctor would be like, your appendix is about to burst. We should take that and your ovaries. Nobody does that now. But there was a scene in the book where this girl had to get her appendix out, and her priest asked the main character to do the operation because all the other doctors were like, oh yeah, we might as well just take the uterus too. And the girl was pregnant. They were basically going to force her to have an abortion because she had appendicitis. And this was normal. Like, this wasn't considered a bad thing. And Maya was actually ridiculed during the surgery because she didn't take out the girl's uterus. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, this is crazy. And I think, with the feminist march and women's rights and women's productive health going on right now in America, I think things like this, books like this, really need to be read by the people who are protesting against the women's march and women's rights and reproductive health and stuff, because I don't think they quite realize how bad this can be and how bad it used to be. I don't think they realize like exactly what it is that like the background of all of this. And so I learned a lot from this book, and not in a preachy, gross way. The other thing that I thought was cool was Maya teaches the girls about contraception. And when I say girls, I mean the prostitutes who live in her area, because she set up her hospital, her private clinic, which is in her house, in like very near the ghetto, so that she could specifically get pickpockets and thieves and prostitutes and homeless people and then of course the artists and the singers and whatever to come to her, because apparently one way that a lot of singers and dancers and stuff could make money to survive, because they weren't getting paid enough, was to become a kept woman, which, I mean, if that's the only thing you can do besides starve, I'm not gonna judge. Good grief. Um, and so she taught them about contraception. And one thing I also didn't know that I learned in this book and then looked it up later and double checked and it was true, is that passing out contraception information was a crime. You weren't allowed to teach people about birth control. And that's crazy. Like I don't know, man. I guess I didn't realize when I read it the first time when I was, 15, that this was that way. Actually, I was probably about 16, but still, I mean, I didn't realize, like, it didn't make as big of an impact on me. And I think part of that was because I was very sheltered. And this, like, touches on how I learned about why the feminist movement was, like, the way it is and why it's so important and why people, like, get upset. I was very sheltered from a lot of the issues that a lot of women deal with, because my mom was a major in the Air Force, and when people tried to pull sexist shit on her, she kicked their asses. And people weren't stupid enough to do it to me when I still lived at home because my mom was such a badass. And then the few times that I ran into it when I was a kid, because of my life circumstances, I didn't realize that it was because of sexism. I thought and also other things, like I dealt with a lot of racism when I was a kid. I dealt with a lot of isms when I was a kid, and I didn't realize that it was because of the isms. I thought it was because of me, that there was something wrong with me specifically, and I felt very isolated from, the marginalized groups that I actually belonged to. That's not even, it's getting off on a tangent. But so I thought I learned when I reread this book, I'd already known this stuff, but I like kind of forgot it, kind of went to the back of my mind. And then I reread this book and like recently, like in the last couple of months, and I was like, holy shit. And like, so kudos to Mercedes Lackey for writing this book, especially when it came out. This is not a new book. This book came out in like the early 90s, mid 90s, I think. And, things are kind of better now, but they were shit back then, and even worse shit when the book is set, but, still shit back then. And, so kudos to Mercedes Lackey for writing this book, and it's very informative without being preachy, and it's the way it's written is very deft. She did this really well, I think. And she dealt with the racism and the sexism and the medical field, and even with the wizards, like even the good guys, the White Lodge wizards, even though they're good guys, they're still dickheads a lot of the time. Like there's like Hindu magic, because the bad guy is a Hindu and so is the female lead, and I thought that was kind of interesting because it was nice to have a non-white female lead. It was like, it would have been bad if it was a white female lead going up against a Hindu female villain. That would have been bad. But instead they have basically like a conflict within Hindu mythology with two Hindu characters, so that there's none of this like white supremacy shit going on, or at least not like a lot of it, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But the female lead is using, or the female villain is using Hindu dark magic, and it's not real magic. I'm just putting that out there. It's fantasy magic. But she's using this dark magic to kill these Englishmen, and actually, her reason for killing them is a valid one. What she's doing is wrong, but why she's doing it, I understand why she's doing this. And the fact that this wasn't addressed by any of the good guys was, I felt, a problem. But maybe Mercedes Lackey just like didn't have, the experience or the mental resources and knowledge base to address the situation appropriately. I don't know. Hang on, I have to take a drink. Is what happens when you talk a lot. But so going back to the White Lodge and them, even though they're supposed to be good guys, they're all fuckheads. The leader of the White Lodge, Lord Alderscroft, is like, oh shit, Hindu magic is coming across the ocean from India to kill off white people. We have to save all the white people. And Peter, the male lead, is like, well, first of all, we don't know that it's a Hindu, and second of all, we don't know that it's coming from India. It could be coming from here. And Lord Aldercroft is like, nope, 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 you know, because no evil magic could get into Britain. Like, no, those backwards Hindu people, they couldn't sneak into Britain and then sabotage us from the inside, which is exactly what happened, by the way. And so Peter's like, dude, I really think, and Lord Aldercroft is like, pish tosh, no. What we're gonna do is we're gonna create a giant bubble around all of England, and that will protect us from all the threats that ever were ever, and then those Hindu people can take care of themselves. And Peter's like, dude, that is the stupidest idea I have ever heard. And Lord Aldercroft is like, shut up, you're a tradesman, you don't know what you're talking about. So they do that. Guess what? The bad guy's in England. She knows what she's doing. She almost kills, like, a lot of people. Gotta admire her. I gotta admire her reasoning. I know that caste systems. I am not Indian, okay? I have an Indian friend, but she's like half Indian, half Dutch, and I haven't talked to her in a long time. But when I read this, I talked to her about it and asked her about it, and she kind of explained it, that especially back then, caste systems were a big deal in England. And so a Brahmin woman, Brahmins are like the top caste in India, I guess. At least in the Hindu part of India. For a Brahmin woman to marry an Englishman was like a really big deal, and not in a good way. And that's what happened with Maya's mom. And so the bad guy is Maya's aunt, who's like, oh my gosh, what the heck? How could you marry this guy? You shamed our family. And so she kills the sister. And I guess that's common? I don't know. Or at least back then, I guess? I'm not sure. And this is where we get into the part that I'm like, I think maybe Mercedes Lackey could have done this a little different. And please, nobody stab me in the face. I realize that this woman is like one of the biggest names in fantasy, and has been for over 3 decades. I realize that Mercedes Lackey is like a super huge deal. I have actually talked to her before online. She is really nice. She's really cool. I don't think she did anything bad on purpose, but this is the thing. I think now we have created more awareness with cultural appropriation and misrepresentation, and also internalized misogyny in books. And so I wonder if maybe this could have been done in a different way, because it seems like honor killing, which this basically was what the aunt did to the sister was basically an honor killing. And especially when you hear about honor killings in the news now with radicalized Muslims, and that, like, you know, with ISIS and that sort of thing, I think, and now granted, the political climate of the modern era was the modern era of the 90s when this book came out, so maybe, like, again, there wasn't as much information. I think that maybe this could have been handled in a different way. Not even that Mercedes Lackey should have not kept in that the aunt killed the sister, for the family honor, but maybe have other Hindus comment on the fact that she did this. The only person who really does comment on this situation who's a Hindu besides Maya is this guy named Gupta, who is the mom's sworn protector, and so of course he's going to feel like some kind of way about the fact that she was killed. And so maybe somebody who was like divorced from the situation might have been a better mouthpiece to then have like some kind of commentary to show the complexity of how Indian people feel about this topic. And maybe there just wasn't room in the book, and I don't know, but I feel like maybe there should have been a little more discussion of the moral implications and the cultural impact of what was done. And this also then leads me to further on Maya's reliance on English magic. She inherited magic from her mom, but her mom says that the magic Maya has is more attuned to her father's people, which means that it's more attuned to the British. And that doesn't make any sense to me. And I realized that, like, the entire plot would have fallen apart if this was not true, because one of the reasons Maya went to England was to find somebody who could teach her how to use English magic. And I realized that, like, then the plot would have, like, totally broken apart and been, you know, there would have been nothing to do if that wasn't the case. But I feel like while, you know, points for including a biracial half-Indian character, points for including Indian culture, points for including Hindus that are not all evil, and not all magical either, which then eliminates the inherent othering of magical non-white people. At least in part, I think that maybe it would have been better if Maya was trying to learn Hindu magic instead of British magic. Because it's like, all right, well, she's Indian. Like, why make her Indian if she's not going to use Indian magic? You know what I mean? And why is she protected by Hindu deities if she's not using Hindu magic? And I realized, like, I explained this earlier with the whole thing with Kali Durga and how Kali, has turned her back on this woman, and these other avatars are there to, like, take out this woman because she's, shamed her goddess or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like it would have been better if Maya had been wanting to learn Indian magic, or even blending the two, because she herself is a blend of the two cultures. And that's actually something I do like, is that although she lives in England, and although she is trying to learn English magic, and although she acknowledges that she is half English, she never lets go of her Hindu and her Hindu influences and Indian culture. And she does have a very interesting idea of, like, divinity because of the way she was raised by a Christian dad and a Hindu mom. And she never lets go of, like, the cultural trappings of her upbringing, which I think is great, because I mean, if you live like 25 years in India, you're not going to just, like, shuck it all off and be like, yeah, I'm British now. But because of that, I think it was very jarring when I reread the book that she's like, yeah, I need to learn English magic and only English magic, and Hindu magic has no place in this. Especially because this sentiment is echoed by Lord Alderscroft, who's like, yeah, Hindu magic and British magic can't mix. It's not even Hindu magic, he says Eastern magic. So that could be magic from, from Nepal, from China, from Japan. He's like, Western magic, European magic, and Eastern magic, Southeast Asian and Southeast Asian magic, do not mix. And to hear Maya say that also, to echo that, and it to be true, I think, I don't know, I don't like it. I think it was a major flaw in the book. I actually ended up changing my Goodreads rating from 5 stars to 3 because of the way the cultural meshing was handled. And I don't think that Mercedes Lackey is trying to make a comment on, the validity of Hinduism or Indian culture. I just think it might have, I don't think she thought of how it would be received. I really like the book. I would recommend it to people. I just don't know, like, I don't want to recommend it to people without saying this, that there's some issues with the way that Hindu culture is used and then discarded, and then used and then discarded, in a way that really it shouldn't have been. Also, just a warning, there is some triggering moments. Maya is assaulted. She's not raped, but she is almost assaulted. A guy tries to kiss her, tries to force himself on her, and she ends up knocking him out. So I just want to let everyone know that that's a thing. And then, there's child torture, although it's not in text, it's mentioned. And, there's some, oh shoot, I can't think of the word. There's a lot of sexism, and in a way that's, like, super highly abusive, and so I just want to warn everybody about that. There's also racism and anti-Irish sentiment, because there's an Irish doctor who's treated like garbage because he's Irish. And so I think that's all the warnings for this book, and I know that I'm usually like, oh my god, and so much emotion, but I really wanted to talk about in seriousness so that you guys would actually listen and not, like, laugh, because I know I can be funny sometimes, about how I felt about the way Hinduism was dealt with in this book. And again, I would recommend it. I would. I would recommend Mercedes Lackey because I think she's great. I just think that maybe if she were to write this book today, maybe she would do it a little differently. Anyway, so that was my review for The Serpent's Shadow by Mercedes Lackey, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And, please like, comment, subscribe. What did you guys have to say about this book if you've read it? And have you read it? Are you going to read it? What do you think about the questions that I raised and the points that I made? And I would like to hear from you. So, please let me know, and I will talk to you guys in the next podcast. Thanks. Bye.